Be seated, please. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 93 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders, and therefore members are attending in person in the room as well as remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of members and witnesses. Before speaking, please do wait until I recognize you by name. You may speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available. Although this room is equipped with a powerful audio system, feedback events can occur. These can be extremely harmful to the interpreters. The most common cause of sound feedback is an earpiece worn too close to a microphone. With regards to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do our best to maintain consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, November 8th, 2023, the committee will resume its study of Canada's diplomatic capacity. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses. Appearing before us is the Honourable Melanie Joly, the Minister of Foreign Affairs. She is accompanied, of course, by Mr. David Morrison, who is the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Mr. Antoine Chevrier, the Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Transformation Officer. So we're grateful that you're all here. Minister, I know you're very, very excited about this particular topic, so we're happy to have you here. You will have 5 minutes, I'm afraid, for opening remarks, after which we will turn to the members for questions. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ali. Good to see all of you. Ça me fait plaisir de vous voir tous réunis.
Colleagues, I'm pleased to appear before you all today.
First, Canada finds itself in a growing international security crisis. It is undeniable. Just a few days ago, I was in Kyiv, delivering a clear message from our government to Ukrainians. And we're not going anywhere, and we will be there for as long as it takes. Canada will continue to support Ukraine's fight for freedom through the end, and of course the end of the war, but also beyond. This is why Canada and Ukraine have launched an international coalition to bring Ukrainian children back home. And we want to make sure that kids are never used as pawns in wartime. Even after the war, Ukraine will be next door to a very dangerous neighbor, which is Russia. And we know that in that context, Canada must be able to help Ukraine defend itself and show deterrence in light of danger. And so that's why I was there, and we have been working on advancing on Canada's long-term bilateral security commitments to Ukraine to deter future Russian aggression. Malheureusement, ce n'est pas...
Unfortunately, that is not the only conflict in the world that Canadians are concerned about. We're all deeply troubled by the devastating scenes coming out of the Middle East, whether it be the Hamas terrorist attack against Israel on October 7, which we continue to roundly condemn, or the death toll from the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, which we are all extremely concerned about. Our government is continuing to support urgent efforts to reach an agreement to free hostages that will allow for more humanitarian assistance to flow into Gaza and that will force Hamas to lay down its arms. We hope that this agreement will lead to a sustainable ceasefire as well as a two-state solution.
Yes, in Kherson or even in Khartoum, the rules-based system that has kept Canadians safe for generations is cracking. We're all facing increasingly complex modern challenges. Disinformation, the rise of AI, political polarization, including the rise of extremist and populist movements, even here in Canada. We cannot let bad actors exploit this uncertainty with impunity. In rising to meet these challenges, I have been clear that our government's foreign policy will be guided by two key principles. The first one, we absolutely need to defend Canada's sovereignty. Our national interest requires it, and our national security depends on it. We must stand firm and defend the rules-based system and the institutions that have kept us safe. The second is pragmatic diplomacy. We need to engage in pragmatic diplomacy to work with countries of different perspectives to defend an international conflict. To prevent, an international conflict. I don't believe in the empty chair policy. We will never compromise our values, and we will never compromise our national interests. Now, talking about what we do on the world stage, to make sure that we succeed, we must be present globally. And our eyes and ears on the ground, our diplomats, must be diverse, must be bilingual, must be healthy and well-equipped. And last fall, we released a detailed plan to transform Global Affairs Canada for the future of diplomacy. It is more important than ever that this plan be implemented, and thank you, Antoine, and thank you, David, for working actively on this. This plan has 4 points. First one, le premier, il y a un besoin.
First, there is a need to invest in our people, in our world, as we say, and that includes the recruitment of a diplomatic corps that is representative of Canada in all its diversity. Francophones must be able to speak their mother tongue, and we need to speak more foreign languages and speak them better. We also need to provide greater support to our diplomats, their staff, and their families abroad.
Increase our presence where it matters most. This means expanding our influence in key multilateral institutions, including, of course, the United Nations. We must also grow our diplomatic footprint in key regions such as Eastern Europe, Africa, and the Indo-Pacific, something our government has already begun doing. Thirdly, we need to enhance our policy expertise to better anticipate and manage prolonged crisis, climate change, as well as the issue of AI and the digital world. And last but not least, we must have the tools and processes to be efficient and to be better protected from cyber threats, something currently top of mind for all of us. Alors voilà, je suis prête à prendre vos questions.
So there you have it. I'd be pleased to answer your question.
Thank you very much, Minister. We now turn to the members for their questions. And the first member up is MP Chong. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chase. Thank you, Minister, for appearing. We appreciate that. I wanted to ask you first about the recent revelation that Iran employed someone who hired 2 members of the Hells Angels to be assassins in North America to target members of the Persian diaspora here in North America. The first question I have is, did the U.S. government inform the Canadian government of this matter before the indictment was unsealed in U.S. court?
Thank you for that. Of course, because this is linked to law enforcement work and the work that is done through the Minister of Public Safety, I would refer you to the Minister of Public Safety on this issue. That being said, on the question of any link of foreign interference or foreign criminal action in Canada, you, of course, are aware that we're dealing with this issue through the Foreign Interference and Public Inquiry.
Canada doesn't have diplomatic relations with Iran.
No, we don't.
Is Italy still our protecting power?
Yes.
Has the Canadian government asked the Italian government to make representations on our behalf to the Islamic Republic of Iran in respect of this case, where Canadians are being hired as assassins?
There's no question that Iran knows that we believe that Iran is a state sponsor of terror, that we have the strongest measures against Iran and pretty much in the world. And we'll continue to make sure that this regime is held accountable at different ways. I must say, when it comes to any form of these cases, my role as foreign minister is twofold. First is to make sure that if there's any diplomats that would be undergoing any foreign interference, I would be send them packing. Now, we don't have diplomatic relations with Iran, so there's no diplomats in Canada representing Iran in, in our bilateral relationship. So first, and second, if we were made aware of any information beforehand, we would make it transparent, like we did in your case, Michael, last summer, when it came clear that China had tried to put pressure on you and your family. And so on, we'll continue to do that because obviously you and I and all of us know that the question of foreign interference is extremely important and we will never tolerate it.
Thank you. I'd like to, since we're on the future of diplomacy and the machinery of government, I'd like to focus on a machinery issue, which is the recent security breaches at the department. Last summer, the U.S. government announced that hackers from the People's Republic of China were behind a hack into U.S. State Department emails. Last week, your department announced that it had been subject to a cyber attack that forced the government to shut down part of the department's computer systems. It's the second major attack since the last one in early 2022. Can you tell us if these are state or non-state actors behind this attack?
So, first and foremost, when it comes to our IT systems, we are investing to make sure that we're protecting them even more, as we know that there have been much more cyber incidents, not only within the Five Eyes, but also within the G7. And that's why, like you were saying, Michael, the future of diplomacy is important because I hope I can get your support. We need more support, more money to invest in this infrastructure. Second, when it comes to the latest incident, we took proactive measures to address it. Of course, we made sure that people working within global affairs were alerted and well taken care of, and at the same time that we would be addressing our system itself and its infrastructure. But what I can say is that the investigation is undergoing, and I can't comment any further.
I'd like to talk about another machinery issue, which is the Global Security Reporting Program. The NCIRA report of December 20th last year concluded that there was conflict between CSIS, our domestic intelligence gathering agency, and the Global Security Reporting Program, and that there needed to be deconflicting of that tension between the two entities within the Government of Canada. Do you agree with that conclusion? And if so, what measures are you taking to rectify that situation?
To be frank, I never heard any tensions between both, and there was never any representation done towards me by CSIS or its director to talk about the fact that there was apparently a conflict between both. So I read that for the first time in the Globe and Mail. That being said, I don't agree with the fact that that there should be any issues because fundamentally this program, which is headed by Global Affairs, abides by the Vienna Convention, is extremely important across the world. And when it comes also to the allegations that potentially one of the Michaels was linked to it, I profoundly disagree. I will always defend our two Michaels, which were arbitrarily detained by China, and this will always be the position of our government. And of course, I hope that it is the position of all members of this committee and in the House.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. We now go to MP Chattel. You have 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Minister, first, welcome to our committee today. And on a more personal note, I'd like to say thank you for the empathy that you've demonstrated towards the women, the children, the civilians who were killed in Israel in the Gaza Strip in great number, and also your efforts to bring peace to the Middle East, and in addition to maintaining human dignity. So I'd like to thank you first and foremost for that. Now, at this committee, Minister, we're studying Canada's diplomatic capacity, and we invited you here today because we are currently studying, and you are currently studying, the future of Canadian diplomacy. And that's an initiative that you've presented to us today, and it's to your honour. But could you explain to our committee, please, in your own words, could you please explain to Canadians what that means to you and for Global Affairs Canada? Thank you very much, Sophie. Well, it's an extremely important exercise. We know that we're in a new world where there are more crises, more wars, more issues to do with climate change, for example, artificial intelligence. Therefore, we need modern, contemporary diplomacy that is tailored to today's challenges of the 21st century. So the work that David and Antoine and I are doing together, hand in hand, is a colossal job. We must first and foremost invest in our people, in our staff, in our diplomats. What we're offering at the end of the day is their expertise, their services across the globe. Now, we know that they have a footprint both in Ottawa and across the world, and I'd like to thank them for that. It's quite an endeavour. It's quite a mission when one decides to become a diplomat, and we know that we are well represented by them on the world stage. Now, we also need to bolster our presence on the world stage. It's absolutely crucial that there be more Canadians at the United Nations. It's also crucial not only that there be more Canadians at the United Nations, but in multilateral organisations. Currently, the rules are being tested by autocratic countries and governments. There is a new world order being drafted when it comes to artificial intelligence. And if we are not present, front and centre, and investing in those organisations, we won't be able to stand up for our own interests and, moreover, to promote those interests. That's why our presence is important. We need to increase our expertise when it comes to climate change, artificial intelligence. And finally, we need to increase and enhance our resources when it comes to information technology, which has to do also with the response I just gave to our colleague. Indeed, there need to be global affairs staff who are working on fundamental issues across the world. The issues are increasingly global and globalized. Now, a number of people have alluded to, throughout this study, of how important it is to get the expertise from other departments to break down silos. I know that's part of your action plan, but if you could just make mention of that now. Indeed. Well, when you look at our embassies abroad, they're not just they aren't just diplomats there. Of course, there are diplomats who are working with foreign governments, who are creating diplomatic ties and strengthening them. But at the end of the day, there are many diplomats that work for Citizenship and Immigration Canada that provide immigration services. Others work in the area of international trade to be able to provide services to entrepreneurs who are wanting to increase their market share and sell more of their goods and services. There are also people in our employ who work at the Department of Defence, who provide support to our allies across the world and throughout our missions. So it's very broad. Yes, I'm the Minister of Foreign Affairs in charge of a diplomatic network, but I also work hand in hand with my colleagues that have staff they're in charge of abroad, and that's why we need to work together. Do I have any time left, Mr. Chairperson? Oh, I'm not used to having so much time. I'd like to know more specifically, you spoke about your people earlier, and I'd like you to take a moment to speak about your diplomatic staff that are in conflict zones. You've talked about the importance of protecting our people. Obviously, that's important. These folks go to work in crisis and conflict zones. Well, Sophie, I should say right off the bat that I was really impressed, really touched by the hard work done by our ambassadors, Arisa Galasak, was our ambassador in Ukraine at the time of the initial invasion, another ambassador who I met with only last week, who's really working with very tough situations. There are constant threats of missile strikes. There are about 40 missiles just today that were launched by Russia and struck Ukraine, particularly in Kiev. And, of course, there's Philippe, who is our ambassador in Khartoum in Sudan, who had to manage an extremely difficult situation where our diplomats' lives were in peril, and he had to work on an evacuation out of Kenya. And David Atsilva, who's in Ramallah, Visa, who is in Tel Aviv, who has also had to work on evacuations and is working on a daily basis with a high level of risk to their own personal safety. Hamas is, of course, bombing Israel. There's also the bombing of the Gaza Strip. And there are Canadians who are in danger in those zones, and we need to support and protect them. Since I became Minister of Foreign Affairs, there have been 3 wars, 3 evacuation efforts, and I have testified personally to the extent to which the staff of Global Affairs Canada are working in really difficult situations with a huge amount of pressure on their shoulders.
So next, Madame Larouche, bienvenue. Vous avez 6 minutes.
You have 6 minutes, Ms. Larouche. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Minister, first I'd like to talk to you about French at Global Affairs Canada. Your game plan for the future of diplomacy sets out the following, and I quote, that senior managers from all the department have to be held accountable to ensure the equal use of French and a bilingual workplace in order to promote Francophone diplomacy, both within the government, the public service, and missions abroad. Now, one imagines that there is a colossal amount of work. Last week, an ADM appeared before this committee and spoke as a unilingual Anglophone, and even in his opening remarks. Now, the Prime Minister at events abroad would speak French or only English and only use French to sum things up, that the Governor-General, who sometimes represents Canada abroad, still isn't speaking French. And certain senior officials, when they attend conferences or they participate in diplomatic events in Ottawa, only speak in English and only use French when it comes to window dressing. So could you please respond to my question about the use of French at Global Affairs Canada? Is your transformation policy for certain public servants, for example, deputy ministers and other assistant deputy ministers, will they have to take exams? And what about the equal use of French? Your document refers to 2 official languages. Does that applies to the Prime Minister, yourself and you at events of global import? And third, the mechanism to get important positions at the department has been discussed. Francophones are discriminated against when it comes to promotions. Is that just something of the past, Minister? Could you talk about how French is an asset when it comes to diplomacy and why it should be an integral part of our global strategy? And my final question, where would French be useful in particular, and which continents when it comes to diplomacy? Well, thank you very much, Adrian. I think that both of us can agree that we need to continue to protect French. And at Global Affairs Canada, that is a concern that I have, particularly as a former Minister of Official Languages, a proud Francophone, a proud Quebecer. It's a concern of mine, and I've spoken with David and Antoine about this issue on many occasions. The Official Languages Act applies to all departments, including Global Affairs. The Official Languages Act was strengthened after the White Book that I published as Minister a piece of legislation that I introduced and my colleague, Minister Petitpas-Taylor, was able to finish up, and I'd like to thank her for that. And for far too long, the Official Languages Act didn't deal with international affairs to a sufficient extent. That's why we sought to overhaul the legislation in order to address that shortcoming. And in the Official Languages Act, we wanted to show how important the international francophonie is. We are a member of the international francophonie, and that gives us access to dozens of countries with which we can maintain very constructive diplomatic ties. Africa, the Middle East, for example, Asia to a certain extent, and of course within the European Union. So that's in response to your question. Now, you said, is this an asset, French, or not? Obviously, it is an asset. Should we further leverage this asset? Absolutely. Is it something that makes us extremely proud at Global Affairs Canada and makes me proud as a minister? Absolutely. Well, yes, just 30 seconds to tie things up. I'm sorry, your question was very long, so my answer is quite long too. But will there be exemptions for deputy ministers? Absolutely not. There will not be. Deputy ministers mandatorily must be bilingual, and they need to meet the obligations under the Official Languages Act. You, me, all francophones know that bilingualism in Ottawa and in the federal public service should never be taken for granted. We know that we have to stand up for our rights. We need to speak loud and clear about this being a priority. It's a priority for me. It's a priority for my department. Thank you. I'm sorry about such a long question. I'll try and be more concise with my other lines of questioning. Now, I'd like to talk about partisan appointments, Minister. A number of witnesses that have appeared before us in this study have expressed misgivings about partisan appointments in Canadian representation abroad. And they talked about the need for... Recently, the Hill Times explained that Prime Minister Trudeau was the third Canadian Prime Minister with the highest number of appointments of former cabinet ministers, only exceeded by Chrétien and Pierre-Elliott Trudeau. And we learned recently that the Prime Minister proposed to his former Minister of Justice to have a position in Spain. Marc Garneau refused a position in France. Bob Rae is at the UN. There are others in China. There are other Liberal members of Parliament that are now representatives abroad, and your template document has stated that Global Affairs Canada needs to promote creativity, to reward it, entrepreneurship, and to encourage judicious risk-taking. So what do you have to say about the nominations process?
A response in 20 seconds.
On peut être fier d'avoir de très bons ambassadeurs.
Well, we can be proud to have excellent ambassadors, whether it be in Washington, in Beijing, in Brasilia, in Brazil, who are excellent ambassadors who come from our diplomatic network, of course. And we can be proud of having a very strong diplomatic corps with, indeed, people with a whole wealth of experience who are highly expected, whether it be in France or whether it be at 10 Downing Street in London, or our new ambassador in Denmark. We know that Denmark has ties with Greenland, and we know there's a very important Indigenous issue in Greenland, and that is the relationship with the Inuit peoples there. We know that Ms. Bennett has a lot of experience when it comes to relations with Indigenous communities and the Inuit community particularly. That's why it's an excellent appointment, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. We now go to MP McPherson.
Thank you, Mr.
have
Chair.
6 minutes.
Thank you very much for you to be here, Minister. Thank you for you as well. I just learned that David was a good friend of my husband as a child, so it's a nice reunion for us today.
child, not
When
one
my
visitor.
I'm going to ask you three.
Let's clarify that.
I'm going to ask you three questions, Minister, and I'll have you respond to them at the end just to give you some time for that. I am going to ask some questions about the Middle East, and I'm going to start with our arms sales and the arms sales to Israel. And what I want to ask, I mean, I've asked order paper questions, been given very substandard responses. I know the media is very frustrated. They're getting different answers at different times. So I guess very clearly, and this is the first question, is Canada and has Canada been sending arms, whether it is military or non-military, whether it is technology, whether it is lethal or non-lethal, whether it is dual use to Israel? So that's the first question. And the reason I'm asking that question is because with the ICJ investigation that says there is a plausible case of genocide happening, Canada could be complicit. I'm concerned that Canada could be complicit in a genocide if we are continuing to sell arms. The second one that I wanted to ask you about, you know, CBC reported today, I think I've been very clear that I was horrified by your government's decision to defund UNRWA. Absolutely horrified. We know it is the only organization that can get life-saving support to innocent children in Gaza. We know that. That's very clear. Your decision was made, it's now being reported by CBC, with no information. The Canadian officials had no information when they made that decision, and it was simply on the word of information you received from Israel. So I have deep concerns about that, and if you could talk a little bit about how you justify that and when we can expect that pause to be lifted so that the innocent children in Gaza aren't the ones that are suffering from the terrorist actions of Hamas. And that does bring me to Hamas. And I have to say, I was happy.
If I may, if the members could attempt at least to demonstrate that the questions they're asking are somewhat relevant to Canada's diplomatic capacity
Absolutely.
or the machinery of government
So
of GAC, that would be much appreciated.
So today, or yesterday, we learned that Hamas was being sanctioned. And of course, we're happy that that happened. Hamas is a terrorist organization. They are responsible for untold suffering for Israeli and Palestinian people. However, what we didn't see was the same sort of action on some of the very genocidal comments we've heard out of the very far-right Netanyahu government. You know, I'm going to tell you, the Minister of Defense called Palestinians human animals. The Minister of Agriculture stated we are now actually rolling out the Gaza Nakba. The Minister of National Security likened Gazan civilians to terrorists, saying that they should also be destroyed. The Minister of Heritage argued against providing humanitarian aid to Gaza, saying there is no such a thing as uninvolved civilians in Gaza. The Minister of Finance said we need to deal a blow that hasn't been seen in 50 years.
I'm going to have to interview. If you could please try to make it relevant to the topic at hand, it would be
With all
much
due
appreciated.
respect, how we respond to other government officials is diplomatic. How we choose to sanction other government officials is a key diplomatic role of this government, and that is a very, very reasonable question to ask the government.
MP McPherson, that relevance is an elastic term, but let's try to frame it.
Yeah, absolutely, and I can certainly bring forward some. You know, I just received a letter from the minister today for a letter I wrote to her in October that talks about the fact that diplomacy will help us with arms sales to Saudi Arabia. I can submit that if you'd like. It is clearly diplomatic. Thank you. So my concern is when we have people like this making these claims, saying these things about innocent civilians. Absolutely, we need to sanction Hamas. When are you going to be sanctioning these government officials?
Okay, thank you. Well, first, Heather, I know you've been to the region, and I was in the region as well. And what is happening in Gaza is absolutely catastrophic. It's the worst place on earth to live right now. And I think Canadians know that. It is a heartbreaking situation. And meanwhile, we absolutely believe that when it comes to the ICJ, to answer your question, we respect the court, and parties need to make sure that they abide by the decision. And
Minister, that wasn't my question.
I'm sorry, Heather. I'll just continue. And I've raised this issue with my counterpart because we all agree that more humanitarian aid needs to go into Gaza. We all agree that the violence must stop. We all agree that we need to get to a hostage deal, which will eventually lead to a sustainable ceasefire, which will eventually lead we hope, to a two-state solution. This has been Canada's position, and I hope that that's the case around this table and in the House of Commons with all parties. Now, on the question of UNRWA, I agree that we need to provide humanitarian aid. We all do. There's an important investigation happening right now at the UN. My former colleague, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of France, Catherine Colonna, has been appointed. It is an important investigation because the allegations are serious. And that being said, we absolutely, meanwhile, need to continue to provide humanitarian aid through different organizations, and the Minister of International Development is in charge of that. Now, when it comes to arms, because you asked me that question. So you and I and all of us know about our arms trade system. We have one of the most robust in the world. And what I can tell you is, of course, and for those who are watching, how it works is Canadian companies come to see the government to have export permits emitted. So it's not the Canadian government sending weapons. It's actually companies coming to see us. What I can tell you is that there's been no weapons sent under my watch and in recent years, and none since October 7th.
But I did ask about non-military.
I'll just continue.
Minister, if I could ask that you conclude your response in 20 seconds.
Yes, and we have sent, since October 7th, non-lethal equipment, including night vision goggles and protective gears, and that was through Canadian companies sending them to Canadian companies, Israeli companies in Israel.
Thank you, Minister. We now go to MP Chong. You have 5 minutes.
I think I'll give my time to MP Hoback, Mr. Chair, if you permit.
MP Hoback.
Thank you, Chair, and Minister, thank you for being here this afternoon. Minister, Michael Spavro alleges that GSRP bears some responsibility for his wrongful detention, and the report from the NSIRA concluded that the Global Security Reporting Program operates under the Vienna Convention of Diplomatic Relations. But there is no legal guidance, no risk assessment, no security protocols, and insufficient training to ensure that the 30-plus GAC officers in the GSR program operate within international law. Now, this report came out in 2020. Has anything changed in regards to that, or is there any accuracy to what this report is saying?
Randy, I'll be super frank. When we talk about Michael Kovrig not abiding by the Vienna Convention, we're falling into China's narrative. And I'm really mad that the Conservative Party and you would raise this question, because we have been fighting to get these two Michaels back. We got, no, but let me finish, and I'll answer your question. But I refuse the premise of the question. And it's not partisan, guys. It is, no, it's not.
No, it is.
No.
It comes under
these
the mechanism
two Canadians,
of global
Randy,
affairs.
these two Canadians were arbitrarily jailed in China. And every single day was a day
It's not me
that
saying
they
that. It's
shouldn't
Michael
have been
Spavro
jailed.
saying that. You
and
do understand that.
I'll get to the GSRP.
Okay.
But really, you can ask me questions about the GSRP. No problem. But please, don't get into the narrative of China saying that because he was a GRCP officer, he was therefore not abiding by the Vienna Convention, and therefore they were allowed to jail him. And so I'm sorry,
Minister, this is
but
Michael
this
Spavro.
is
He's a victim making the
actually
allegations,
going
not
against
the
our
Conservative
national
Party.
interests.
And I do have to ask you then,
this is a
why did you
problem when
wait
it comes
3
to
years to
dealing with
release the
arbitrary
report?
detention. But GSRP,
Why did you wait 3 years to release the report?
No. But
Yeah, we
Allow
just
the
seen
minister
it
to
in December
respond.
2023.
So,
It was written in
but
2020.
I'm
so
sorry,
why
and Michael
3 years did you hold on to this report?
But Randy, the two Michaels issue was not a partisan issue. We all stood behind them. And Michael Kovrig's reputation has been affected by this allegation. So that's why I'm mad that you're referring to this question, because I know that that must not be your intent. It can't be your intent. No Canadian would be trying to actually to have a negative impact on this Canadian hero. But as to the GSRP, we believe that there's no issue with it being a GAC program. We think it's not a national security problem. We think that this is completely abiding by the Vienna Convention. We think that all our diplomats that are working around the world under this program need to be protected. And that's why we will continue to work on this issue. And maybe, David, you want to continue.
Okay, just before we go there, though, I only get so much time, unfortunately, Minister, and I want to be respectful here, but this report was done in 2020. So can you tell me in the last 3 years, now that it's been released in 2023 and we're into 2024, that you've actually addressed the issues that were raised in this report?
Once again, if I could remind all the members to put their questions in the context of the topic.
It is in the context of the departments working together and the training within individuals within the department. That talks about it. There's been no legal guidance, no risk assessment, no security pros, and insufficient training. So have you addressed those issues that were in the report?
Yes, I've answered the NCIRA committee on this, but maybe, David, you want to add to it because I know you've been very much involved.
So the short answer is yes. We received the report. We acted on it. We accepted the recommendations. If you look at the letter, which is in the public domain, that my predecessor, Martha Morgan, wrote in response to the report, we took some issue with the characterization of the Vienna Convention, but we accepted the recommendations and we have actioned them.
Okay. In regards to, Minister, we're seeing 64 elections happening across the world this year. That's a lot of changes, possibly changes in government. And one of the complaints I get from diplomats here in Canada is they don't have an audience with the minister. They can never get an audience with the minister. So we did an order paper question on that. You've only met with one ambassador here in Canada, and that's the ambassador from the U.S. Why is that? Is that normal protocol for the Minister of Foreign Affairs not to meet with the diplomatic corps from other countries here in Canada?
No, that's not the right information. I've met with many ambassadors here.
It's just, again, an order paper question, then we have to go back to...
No, I've met with actually all of them.
But have you had individual one-on-one meetings with these?
I have many. I've had with all the Arab League ambassadors. I've met with all the EU ones, and many times with the head of the EU. I've met also with, of course, the U.S. ambassador many times, with the Indian ambassador. I've met... No,
capacity.
I'm not
going to second guess you on that.
And not only that, because I've gone to so many countries around the world, usually when I do a bilateral visit, usually the ambassador from the country goes. So, for example, the Macedonian ambassador was there.
Explain to me then, Minister, then why an order paper question that asked specifically on that issue came back with these results. Is that a capacity issue within global affairs?
Randy,
I
don't know the specific answer on that, but clearly there is an issue with the answer, so we'll follow up. But I must reassure you that we've been in close contact. And I'm not the only one doing that because I know that Rob Oliphant, my parliamentary secretary, has been meeting with so many of them, and also Pam.
Repeating what other people, ambassadors, have been telling me in my meetings in regard.
Time, considerably.
Thank you, Minister. Appreciate your
time. So we next go to MP Zuberi. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here today. There is so much happening in the world today, and I know that your job is extremely challenging in this time, and I recognize that and appreciate what you're doing in these difficult circumstances. And top of mind right now is the Middle East. A lot of Canadians are watching what's happening, have loved ones who are there. Some Canadians are still stuck in Gaza and are trying to get out along with their families. And our government has made a commitment to help families of Canadians come to Canada. A lot of Canadians have come back and have been able to leave Gaza, which is very positive. And you described it as the worst place on earth right now, and I have no doubt that that is true. Can you let us know what are the challenges about getting the remaining Canadians and their families out of Gaza? What are the challenges that you are facing? And before
If I could once again remind all members of the significance of relevance. Could try to put it in a mold that's relevant to the topic that the minister is here to discuss, it would be much appreciated.
I hope I get that time, Mr. Chair. That 20 seconds?
Definitely will, but I would ask that you keep your questions relevant.
Excellent. So I was about to get to the question, but I want to thank you for the work you did around Mansour Schurman, who is Canadian citizen and now is not detained. And I know that your ministry did a lot. So to my question, Mr. Chair, through you, it's with respect to the challenges that are being faced to get Canadians and their families out. What are they?
Okay, so I've been losing a lot of sleep on this issue of getting Canadians out of Gaza because usually in different countries, we just organize consular services in a way that once Canadians are able to leave, they just leave. They don't necessarily need an authorization, depending on the country. But when it comes to Gaza, we need to get the approval to get any Canadians out, anybody out. And that approval needs to come from Israel, so through COGAT, which is a part of the Ministry of Defense. And also, Canadians getting out of Gaza need to get the approval by Egypt. And coordination between these two governments is not always seamless, to say the least. And also, while the delay has been sometimes frustrating, to be frank, we absolutely need to make sure that Canadians that go to the Rafah gate are able to go while it's secure. And there's been shelling of the Rafah gate region, which has been making it very difficult to get Canadians to go to the Rafah gate. Now, from the moment they're at the Rafah gate, the team in Cairo goes and meet them and are taking care of them. We have an agreement with Egypt. Canadians coming out of Gaza need to leave 48 hours after they have left Gaza, Egypt. So that's why we also worked with Canadians to make sure that they were able to travel to Canada. And if they don't necessarily have the funding for it, we have a loan program, which is very efficient, which we worked on. So I must say, Samir, that having myself constituents that had family in Gaza, that this has been something that I've been putting a lot of pressure and energy on. And I must thank Julie Sunday, who's the head of our consular affairs, and also the hostage team negotiation, because she has been doing fantastic work in a very difficult situation.
Thank you for that. And my remaining time, I want to ask you about Canada's presence today over the last years, 8+ years, with respect to being involved in multilateral organizations like the UN, UNHCR, G7, G20, et cetera, and how that contrasted with the previous government of the past, and the work we're doing to actually be at that stage with other countries at the multilateral fora.
So we believe in the UN. I must say, I'm looking at my friends from the Conservative Party. I don't know what's the official position, whether it's in favor of the UN or not. But I know Michael is looking at me right now. Sometimes silence speaks even louder. So I just want to make sure that my colleagues all agree that the UN is important. That being said, we need more people at the UN. Global Affairs Canada needs more resources, more diplomats, because the world has changed. It has changed when the Harper government was there. It has changed since before the pandemic when we were in power. That's just the reality of it. I've told you at the beginning of it, we're in an international security crisis. So we need more diplomats at the UN, at the G20, working also within the different organizations of the UN, including, for example, in Geneva, at ICAO, etc., because we have many governments that are trying to change the rules of the game, including China. And if we are not at the table, if we don't have the capacity, we're not able to defend our interests.
Thank you very much. We go back to MP Larouche. You have 5 minutes.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
J'avais compris.
I gathered that much. Now, Minister, I'd like to talk about parliamentary democracy. In your documents, you make no mention of parliamentary democracy and how Global Affairs Canada could contribute to taking advantage of parliamentarians' input and contribution to improving Canada's image. Now, in your documentation, you talked about how important it is to further value that exercise. What do you think about parliamentary democracy? Recently, we were embarrassed slightly about what happened in Ukraine because, unless I'm mistaken, you weren't accompanied by any members of the opposition in your previous travels. Canada is one of the only G7 countries that actually didn't send a proper parliamentary delegation. And yet we boast about being Ukraine's closest allies on this transpartisan issue. Now, Minister, did you refuse to have anyone accompany you for security reasons? How is it that security is a prerogative when it comes to parliamentarians and yet not for ministers? Yes, Ariane, we all agree that parliamentary diplomacy is important. Obviously, that's not the bailiwick of Global Affairs Canada. It's the Parliament's prerogative at the end of the day. So when we talk about parliamentary democracy, well, there's the legislative branch and there's a conflict of sorts, a conflict of interest. So therefore, we're going to continue to support the various parliamentary groups, parliamentary friendship groups, further strengthen them. And that will require further work. We know that if we have better diplomatic ties at various levels with various governments, the better off we are. That's my first point. The second point is this. When it comes to Ukraine in and of itself, and I know that Stéphane Bergeron has spoken to me about it only yesterday, in fact, and it sounds like Stéphane's talking to me. When you speak to me, Ariane, I can hear him channeled through your voice, but I can hear you and I hear him loud and clear. At the same time, it's the Parliamentary Security Office that has to reach out to not Global Affairs Canada, but the Department of Defence and the Canadian Armed Forces. I think it's a good idea that there be Canadian parliamentarians that do go to Ukraine. I know that some of you, even Heather, actually went. But in any event, I think that we can work together on this particular issue. It's not just within my purview, however. It's the responsibility of the Department of Defence and also the Speaker of the House.
Thank you very much. We now go to MP McPherson. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I think I'm going to change the channel a little bit. It is International Development Week, and I understand that you are not the International Development Minister. However, there is funding that does come through your ministry in particular for human rights, and we are hearing some really disturbing stories from the sector, from representatives from CSOs across Canada, that those who have been doing great work on human rights, particularly support for women and girls, which should align with our feminist international assistance policy, are waiting enormous amounts of time. Things are getting caught up. In fact, they're telling us that there are funding delays and lack of information from your office. They're telling me that you're failing to uphold the FAAE and that they fear that the cuts made in the past years are going to hurt Canada's work globally. So I'm wondering why the approvals from your office. This is on your side of Global Affairs, and your colleagues' offices are taking so long, and why there are these refusals to to fund multiple human rights projects, particularly those looking at women and girls. And then I guess just before I pass it over to you, Minister, we have been waiting years now for a feminist foreign policy. We have been told it exists. We have been told that it is somewhere in the ether, and we have not seen it. Should we be giving up on this? Is this never going to come forward?
Okay, so Heather, regarding your first point, which is basically organizations that are waiting for funding, it is personally the first time I hear about it. I'll get down I'll look into this issue. That's unacceptable, and we will solve it. So, David, please make sure that we work on this. So, first. Second, on the question of the feminist foreign policy, we live it every day. We have had a feminist approach on our foreign policy since we were elected. We have also, and I've met so many organizations that just coming back from Ukraine, I met with survivors of gender-based violence and, you know, all the work we've done with women and girls around the world. We'll continue to do that. I know the Minister of Trade is working on this issue also, supporting women entrepreneurs. I know, of course, the Minister of International Development, which you were referring to, has been working on the support to women and girls.
But without a policy written down, other organizations can't measure how we're doing. We can't see how Canada's doing when we don't have a written policy.
Wait. We have a Women, Peace and Security Ambassador, Jacqueline O'Neill, who's doing a great work. We've been following the results on everything we do. And so, no, I think our approach when it comes to our feminist foreign policy is data-driven, is result-oriented, and will... It exists. We
would
abide
need to
by
see it
every
to be
day.
able to say it existed.
And so, therefore, we'll continue to work on it, but Canadians can be reassured that this is our approach, and we'll continue to make sure that it is lived every day.
Thank you. Minister, we're almost exactly at the 1 hour mark. There were 2 more questions remaining, but I know you had, that's fine? Okay.
I feel like I'm around my family right now.
Okay, sounds great.
So it's not easy, but hey.
So we will now proceed with the last 2 questions. We first have MP Jenis. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Minister. Are there negotiations happening right now between Canada and Turkey regarding the potential lifting of the arms embargo on Turkey?
We've already lifted the arms embargo, so there's no negotiation.
Okay. Are you concerned about the implications of that, the risk of diversion, et cetera?
So we believe that there should not be any form of, how can I say, lifting of arm export between NATO allies. Turkey is a NATO ally. We've had some tough conversation, particularly following the pause on our arms export to Turkey. I've had very strong and direct conversations with my counterpart from Turkey about Armenia in particular.
Yeah, sorry, Minister, just jump in and put a fine point on it. The export of arms to Turkey.
If you could allow the Minister to respond, please.
I'll let your time.
I'll give it back to you, Minister. But
let me just finish my thought.
Okay.
So, in the context of the arms lifting, we've had these negotiations. We've had tough conversations about international security and regional security. And if there's any problem in terms of regional security, and any facts that would be presented to me that would make the regional security and international security at risk, we would be pausing again.
Minister, I'm going to move on to other topics, but we do know that it was Canadian arms that played a decisive role in the outcome of the Armenia-Azerbaijan war, arms that were diverted. I want to ask you about Iran. We don't have diplomatic relations with Iran, but we know that the IRGC, because it is not a listed terrorist organization, is able to operate here in Canada to recruit, fundraise, promote, etc. Do you believe that the IRGC is a terrorist organization? Why hasn't your government shut down their operations in Canada?
So first and foremost, when it comes to Iran, I must say that we're all very supported and moved by the courage of the Iranian people, particularly the women and girls. And we've been, and I've said it before, you know this, Garnet, but I think for Canadians watching us, it's important for them to know. Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism under a criminal code. We have some of the strongest measures against them. We've sanctioned many of the Iranian regimes and RGC members themselves. We also host and we chair every year the
you know
UN
my time is
motion
very
on
tight.
Iran.
IRGC terrorist listing.
I must say that the Prime Minister mentioned recently that we are looking at ways to designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization.
What are the impediments? Well, why not just do it?
Because we're a government that takes decisions that are thoughtful, and that we are undergoing an international security crisis right now. And so when we take decisions, we know that there can be consequences.
But
and that is
Iran
why
is at the
we
heart
address
of that
the issue.
security crisis,
but
right?
I know that many Iranian Canadians...
It's been 6 years since you voted in the House to list.
Finish her response, please.
Mr. Chair, it's my time, and you know that.
Iranian Canadians are concerned. We know that the RGC is involved in terrible activities, not only in Iran, across the region of the Middle East, and we're concerned about Iranian Canadians here. And so that is why we're looking into the issue, because it's very concerning.
Thank you, Minister. I would just say that you voted in the House of Commons to list them as a terrorist organization almost 6 years ago. That's a very, very long time to be sitting on this. One final question. What do you think are the security implications of the winding down of MONUSCO, and what is Canada's position on that?
You're talking about Haiti right now? Sorry.
MONUSCO, DRC.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry about that. So, first and foremost, we're very concerned about what is going on in the DRC. I've had numerous conversations with ambassadors in the region, and I'm planning to go to Africa in the coming weeks. And we've raised the issue also with Rwanda, and we're opening a new embassy in Rwanda.
Sorry, just very tight for time. The security implications of MONUSCO winding down and Canada's position on that, I'd love to know.
So we've raised the issue of peacekeeping, and we've always been very supportive of peacekeeping in the DRC and also across Africa. Bob Ray has been involved as well. When it comes to the work we're doing on the defense side, this is a question that you need to ask much more to the Minister.
It's not about the defense side. It's about Canada's position on the winding down.
You're out of time, Mr. Jennings.
Could you get back to the committee in writing on that, Minister?
It would be a pleasure.
Thank you.
So for our last question, we go to Dr. Fry. I should forewarn you, Dr. Fry, that there are some connectivity problems as best as we can tell on our end. So if there is an issue, we're going to have to go to another member, but hopefully it'll work. Fry, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Minister, before I begin, I just wanted to congratulate you. You asked so many difficult questions, all ranging around the world, and you handled it with great
Fry, I'm afraid, as I assume you can tell, we're having connectivity problems. Dr. Fry, we can't hear you. You're frozen. Dr. Fry, we are having a very, very hard time understanding what you're saying.
That's fine.
Terribly sorry about that, Dr. Fry. So we now go to MP Oliphant. You have 4.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. I agree with Dr. Fry's first comments. I want to have a little different thing. We often talk that global affairs has a lot of lines of business. I don't tend to think of them as business, but it has a lot of business lines. Many of them don't touch Canadians directly. They touch us indirectly, but the issue of Canadians traveling abroad, the issue of Canadians who get into trouble, they may be very simple problems such as a lost passport or something like that can be solved. Some of them are major. Do you feel that global affairs officials are adequately resourced to handle what Canadians need and expect to get traveling in the world? People travel way more than they used to, and I'm just wondering about that.
Well,
self-interested because I travel.
Yeah. Well, I used to be the Minister of Tourism, and what I learned when I was in charge of tourism is Canada is actually the country where the people travel the most per capita. And we love going to the U.S. and we love going to different places around the world. But the world is increasingly complicated to deal with. There are much more different pressures and dangers. And we need to be able to provide that service to Canadians. And that is why we need to have the right processes, no red tape, cut red tape. That's why the future of diplomacy was so important in terms of our reform, our approach. But also, we need to have even better IT services, because that's how we can also help Canadians when they're abroad, to be in touch between the embassy, the consular officer, and also Ottawa. Now, I really hope that while I've been answering many of your questions, and yes, it feels like a family dinner at Jolie Family on Sunday night. Sorry, guys, but that's the reality of my life, because we're a very political family. I really hope that we can all agree on the fact that we need to invest more in our diplomats. It is important that we have our resources. And this work of reforming our Department of Global Affairs Canada has not been done in decades. And this is an opportunity for you to say, yes, I believe in the work Canada does at the international level. And I'll be frank, it should not be partisan. Because I think it's just about what you were saying, Rob. It's about giving services to Canadians, but also it's about protecting our interests. And France has just invested massively in their new network with hiring 700 new diplomats. Following the Biden administration arrival, Secretary Blinken announced a huge reinvestment in the U.S. diplomatic network, which is bearing fruit right now because of so many wars that are happening and security issues. And Germany also has been working on it. So we're not only the only department in the world doing this. Many of our friends and allies are doing so. We know also that many BRICS countries are doing so as well, as they want to increase their influence, as they want to have a stronger voice at the international level. So we need to adapt, and that's why this study is so important.
I'll give you one opportunity to talk about locally engaged staff. We have Canadians who serve abroad, brilliant and important, but we also have locally engaged staff who are citizens of other countries. More support, more engagement, more training.
Yep.
Are those important?
Yes.
Very briefly, Minister, please.
And so something that Canadians don't necessarily know, which I learned becoming Minister of Foreign Affairs, is how much we rely on locally engaged staff around the world. So, for example, an embassy can have maybe, 60 diplomats that are Canadian diplomats, but can have 150 locally engaged staff, which are extremely important. A lot of them do the immigration work. And that is so key to so many members of different communities across the country. And so that is why we need to make sure that we are able to hire them, hire the best and the brightest, be competitive, because all embassies in a given capital will try to recruit the best and the brightest, and we need to be able to retain them. And I think that as they're so fundamental to our lines of business, like you were saying, we need to be able to protect them even more, particularly when it comes to
Afraid you're out of time.
conflicts and crisis. And that's why also for the first time when it came to Ukraine, when it came also to Sudan, we decided to take care of our locally engaged staff and to broaden the diplomatic community in our interpretation to make sure to bring them to safety.
Thank you, Minister. I see that you're well over the 1 hour mark, so I know I speak on behalf of all the members when I say thank you for having made yourself available, for staying considerably above and beyond what had previously been agreed to. Thank you. And I will now adjourn the meeting.
Can I ask for UC, Chair?
Yes, Mr. Morris.
Would like to ask for consent from colleagues to ask a question.
Absolutely. Mr. Morris is here today. He's not a regular member of this committee. Would there be unanimous consent for him to have a question or two for the minister? Yes? Excellent. Mr. Morris, please do proceed.
Wonderful. First of all, thank you, colleagues. Appreciate it.
Florida, could I just ask how long?
Let's say
2 members out of 338.
2 questions, let's say 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair.
4 minutes. Thanks.
You got it. And so, first of all, Chair, so you're aware, in terms of Canada's diplomatic capacity, my question relates to checking another country's claim before cutting funding to a UN organization. So I think it fits within the scope of the study. Minister, as you know, there are 2 million people in Gaza who depend on UNRWA. As you've said many times before, Gaza is the worst place in the world to live right now. They employ 13,000 people. They quickly fired 12 individuals as of January 26 under allegations of connections with Hamas. And as MP McPherson shared earlier, CBC is now reporting that the Government of Canada hasn't seen evidence backing up Israel's claim that staff employed by UNRWA colluded with Hamas in any way before being suspended, before we suspended our funding. And so my question is, in light of all of this, are there conversations in your department right now and or with the Minister of International Development with respect to restoring funding to UNRWA?
Thank you, Mike. So I know there is a very important conversation happening about UNRWA, and I know that UNRWA is important to Palestinians. I really get it. And that's why we supported UNRWA, that's why we invested in UNRWA. Now, what happened on October 7th was catastrophic, we know, and the allegations that that have been made are very serious. And that is why Canada is not the only country that have paused its funding to UNRWA. But at the same time, it is normal that the UN, which I think is doing the right thing, is investigating, because these are serious allegations. And I think, Mike, you can agree with that.
No debate whatsoever about the seriousness of the allegations. The concern I'm raising,
so
and my question is with respect to, have we received any other information beyond from Israel with respect to these 12 individuals, 12 of 13,000 employees in the organization who've already been fired?
So, Mike, it's the Minister of International Development that has been in contact, but it's UNRWA itself that raised the issue with Canada. So it was themselves coming up, to connecting with us to talk about this issue. So that is why we took note of what they were saying, and that is why we worked with other countries about this issue. And now I'm confident, I have total trust in the head of the investigation. She used to be my colleague, a person that I really respect a lot, which is the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of France, Catherine Colonna. I really hope that the investigation can be, as I mentioned, very thorough, but also rapid, because indeed, we need to continue to provide humanitarian aid to Gaza, and UNRWA is fundamental in offering that humanitarian aid.
Just to clarify from your comment, did UNRWA request for Canada to cut funding?
What I'm telling you is, and it's really much more the international, I haven't had conversations with UNRWA. What I know is UNRWA reached out to us as a government to raise these allegations. And we were not the only one. They did that with all other countries that are funders of UNRWA.
Is there a conversation happening right now in the federal government with respect to responding to what we're understanding from CBC on the extent to which we are validating the claim of these 12 individuals?
But this is a conversation you need to, this is a question you need to absolutely ask Ahmed Hussein, our colleague.
Minister, this time I really do mean it. Allow me to thank you for, again, your generous commitment of time. Thank you for having stayed with us for as long as you did. So at this point, I will suspend, and we will resume in a few minutes to ask questions of the officials. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. We will now continue. I'm sorry? So we will now resume questioning of officials. It's been agreed that we will have one round, given that there is committee business that we have to attend to as well. So each member will be provided 4 minutes, and we start off with MP Epp. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the officials for staying. In December, Dr. Charles Burton testified, and he's obviously from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, testified that his U.S. counterparts felt that Canada did not need or was not a part or did not deserve to be a part of important institutions like the Three Eyes. And it was attributed to the Prime Minister's statement that we will never meet our 2% NATO target for defense. Can you respond to that, or was there some other reason that we're not aware of that we were shut out of the Three Eyes? Five Eyes, sorry.
I'm sorry, Five Eyes or Three
Five
Eyes?
Eyes, yes, sorry, yes.
I'm not aware that we've ever been shut out of the Five Eyes. Five Eyes is an intelligence sharing agreement that grew out of U.S.-UK collaboration in the Second World War, later extended to the three other Eyes, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada. Yeah. And we're very much a paid-up member.
Apologies, I misspoke. Canada was left out of AUKUS. That's what I was referring to in 2021, so the Defence and Security Alliance between Australia, U.S., the United Kingdom. We were also left out of the seat when Norway organized the talks with the Taliban. We've also turned our neighbors away, our allies away, when they've come looking for LNG. So how do we respond? I guess where I'm probing for is not so much, I guess the first round with the minister dealt more with our relationship with trouble spots around the world. I'm very concerned about our relationship with our own allies. We don't seem to be having, at least that is coming from the experts that we hear at committee. So how do you comment about Canada's place in the world? How are we viewed by our allies, given that we're being excluded from some of these important opportunities, arenas?
Thank you for the question. I just challenge the premise of the question that we're being excluded. AUKUS is a submarine deal between nations with primary security interests in the Pacific. So that isn't really where we are focused in terms of submarines. So there are additional elements to AUKUS beyond the core submarine arrangement, and in terms of technology sharing and so on. And we've made it clear, as has New Zealand, that at the appropriate time we may be interested in joining in the sort of tech sharing. But that's our Five Eyes partners made it very clear to us that it's effectively a submarine deal. And I will say, I was G7 Sherpa for 5 cycles. I think we're at almost every table that matters. As Minister Joly said, we could be punching harder. We could have more resources, not necessarily deeper pockets, but we do need to reinvest in the Foreign Service. That's the whole spirit of the Future of Diplomacy report and the implementation plan.
Time is limited. I just want to pick up on a comment you made that submarines is not really where we're at, and I'm paraphrasing how you responded. Yeah, Minister Joly in her testimony said that sovereignty was a very important part, and defending that sovereignty was a very important part of Canada's approach going forward. So when it comes to our north, submarines is not an important part of our strategy going forward?
I'm not a defense policy expert. I will simply say that if you unpack how AUKUS started, it began with a very large submarine purchase by Australia, who was committed to purchasing submarines from France and decided, because of the long lag time, that they would purchase from the United States, and then they brought in the UK. So it's hard to think of 3 nuclear-powered I'm not aware that Canada is playing in the Pacific in that way. So we are members of so many clubs that matter. I don't think we should get too upset. There's no question we would be in an Arctic club. So I personally was totally not fussed when AUKUS began because of the circumstances in which it began. And if it turns into a thing, as I said, that is beneficial for Canada in terms of sharing, then I have every expectation that our partners will invite us in.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We next go to MP Oliphant. You have 4 minutes.
I may not need it all. Thank you. Deputy, thank you for being here with your officials. One easy question and one harder one. First easier question is Global Affairs Canada accounts for about 1.8% of the budget of the federal government. Would more be helpful?
Yes. That was the easy one?
What would your top 2 or 3 priorities be in that case?
Top priority is investing in the Foreign Service. Minister Joly gave the statistic. France had a 20% across-the-board budget increase and hired 800 new diplomats. We have allowed over time our Foreign Service to atrophy, both in terms of recruiting, retaining, and investing, including in language capacity. And I had a chat with Mr. Hoback before this session. Canada was extraordinarily blessed between the end of the Cold War and February 2022 and the invasion, because our security was essentially looked after by our geography. And in my building, in the global affairs setup, the high priests of the organization were the trade negotiators. Our best and brightest raced around the world signing trade agreements, because in that 30-year period, we, as I said, were blessed by geography and by globalization, which allowed Canadian companies to sell lots of things, benefiting from free trade agreements. We're now in a very different world, and we need diplomats that do a much broader range of things. Just to drill down on Mr. Joly's point about being at multilateral tables, there are rules being written right now on 6G. We need to be at those tables, both for prosperity reasons, but also for national security reasons. We saw what happened when 5G was rolled out, and the world took too narrow a lens on it. So that requires people at the right tables, in the right organizations, and it costs money.
Thank you. And do I have time for one quick? And maybe Mr. Chevrier or yourself answering this question. I wanted to just get some clarification on the question that Mr. Jennings asked. My understanding is that the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, requested the Security Council of the UN to withdraw the peacekeeping troops earlier than originally planned, and that in late last year the the Security Council acceded to that request to withdraw the MONUSCO troops. And I'm just wondering, am I understanding that correctly? We're not in the Security Council, but am I understanding that process appropriately?
I don't know I don't know whether you have the sequence right or not. Antoine might.
I would need to confirm the sequencing in the exact statement, but we can certainly come back on with a precise response.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now go to Madame Larouche. You have 4 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you to the officials for still being with us. First, I'd like to raise the issue of open diplomacy. In 2022, Danielle Livermark spent 3 decades as an official and Global Affairs seemed to ignore a number of the issues at hand and explained that the Senate's recommendations to wait till 2019, which was a recommendation for the development of a cultural strategy, and that remained unanswered. How does Canada see open and cultural diplomacy, and should there be further investment in the Francophonie in order to have a rapprochement with African countries that are turning increasingly towards China and Russia? Thank you very much for the question. I am very familiar with the 2019 Senate report. And we agreed with almost all of the recommendations therein. We attribute a great deal of importance to cultural diplomacy. When I was a diplomat years ago, that's something that we promoted heavily, just like parliamentary democracy that was alluded to earlier in today's meeting. But it costs money. It doesn't come free. And of course, we need resources in order to send these representatives abroad to serve as an example. And the top priority now needs to be on the fundamentals of the department, and that is to invest in staff and people first and foremost. Well, it was a Senate recommendation. We'll come back to that perhaps later, but now I'd like to raise your collaboration with the provinces. Some witnesses have recommended placing a focus on partnerships with provincial representatives in offices abroad. And what is Global Affairs' strategy for increased collaboration with Quebec's Foreign Service officers? Could Quebec and the provinces play a role in developing a cultural strategy that would further the goals of open diplomacy? Response. Well, as Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, and I was previously Deputy Minister of International Trade, and I can tell you that there's a great deal of collaboration between the federal government and the provinces across the globe. And on many occasions, I had an opportunity to meet with my Quebec counterpart to talk about collaborative efforts. Now, when it comes to cultural diplomacy, it's a great idea, in fact, to share resources, strategies, and I'm sure that that is going on between embassies across the world as we speak. There's no official program per se. However, in our embassies in China, the United States, and across Europe, there is a very close cooperation, including with Quebec.
We now go to MP McPherson. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here today and staying a little bit late as well. I just want to echo, Mr. Morrison, your comments that Canada is in a different place now. And I would argue, I was in the sector at the time. I was not a fan of bringing Global Affairs Canada together from CETA and other departments from trade. I think now diplomacy is important, but I also think development is vitally important. It is one of the legs of the stool that has to hold up our foreign policy as well as defense. And I think we have dropped the ball on diplomacy, but also on development, and do need to do more on defense. So I just want to make that clear. I have a bit of a more detailed question for you. And this is about the concerns that I raised with the Minister and with the government in the fall about the detonators going through Kyrgyzstan to Russia. What it does is it shows a real loophole in our legislation that those detonators were going to Russia, presumably to be used in the exact same landmines that the Canadian government is paying to have demined in Ukraine. This committee had actually done a review. They'd done a sanctions. They had recommended that the Government of Canada publish comprehensive data annually on Canadian exports of dual-use goods like these detonators. And I'm wondering, knowing that we see these loopholes in our arms export system, the minister talked about it being so robust, but I think it's clear from many organizations and many examples that it is not as robust as it needs to be. Will you be making it an immediate priority to publish the data on dual-use goods this year?
Thank you for the question. I also come from the development side. I was at CETA when the amalgamation was announced, and it sort of rocked my world for the same reason. But I will maybe differ with you just a little bit to say that 10 years on, I think it really works for Canada. I think having a common team in the country at the embassies really works for Canada. And having spent time on the development side, having been Deputy Minister of Trade, and now Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, I think it is definitely the right model to have all of those tools in the toolkit at our disposal. So I'm happy to debate that. On your concerns with respect to dual-use technology and detonators, I am not aware of any plan to make it an immediate priority to publish such a list, but we can come back to you on that.
That would be great. I would love that information, and I'll be raising some of these issues as we go forward, because I do think that our arms regime is not working, similar to our sanctions regime not working. And I just would really quickly, I guess, end on the idea that well, there may be some benefit in having our trade, our diplomacy, and our development under the same roof. The challenge is when trade trumps all, and we heard from the minister the idea of pragmatic diplomacy. At this moment, Canada's reputation is not strong in some circles around the world, because pragmatic diplomacy can't mean that we don't protect our values, that we don't protect human rights, that we don't apply international law equally in all contexts. And the rest of the world is watching how Canada is applying those standards in different contexts very, very differently. And it is disastrous for our reputation, which will ultimately have deep implications on our trade relationships.
No comment, no response. Okay. So all the members have had an opportunity to ask their questions. Allow me to thank you, Deputy Minister Morrison, Mr. Chevrier, the Chief Transformation Officer. Thank you for having been here. It's almost 3 hours that you've been here. But I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank the other officials who have joined us. And we have, of course, Ms. Shirley Carruthers, the Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Financial Officer. We have had the pleasure of having Ms. Vera Alexander, the Associate Assistant Deputy Minister for People and Talent Management. And, of course, we have also had the pleasure of having Mr. Stefan Jobin, who is the Director General, Canadian Foreign Service Institute. Thank you ever so much for your time and for your expertise. So we will now suspend for a couple of minutes, just so we could go into committee business. We have someone virtually, though.